everyone. Cindy Yang. Recording in progress. All right. Good morning, everyone. Cindy Yang, Director of Child Care Services Division at the Department of Human Services. Thank you so much for having us here today. And I think actually Allison or Diane is going to kick off first, and then Michelle Lenhart will speak about the other report, and then I'll chime in, and then we'll move into the FFN work. So Allison, I think you're off first.
Yeah, I think I'm kicking it off, and Diane, just interrupt me as I go through and fill in what I'm leaving out. I'm gonna I made a cute little presentation because there are a lot of really cute pictures in this report. Laura, remind me, is it in the meeting invite, the actual report?
It is, and I can put it in the chat.
Great. So just making, because I have 10 minutes to go through it, and I will not hit on everything. So I do really encourage folks to read through it a little bit more closely. It's a big plan, right? So thank you for having me. I'm excited to walk through the final parent-aware racial equity plan. This is, as I said, a fairly big plan with a ton of details. So what I'm going to do is kind of more walk through the highlights of the report and not get into some of the details kind of in the weeds, because I think we just don't have enough time for it. We spent the better part of a year working on it. I'll talk a little bit more about timeline too, but it's a big comprehensive plan. So we'll kind of skim the top. So I wanted to start with who created this plan. You know, depending on the size of your screen, this might be really, really tiny and hard to read, but it is at the top of the report because I think it's really important to just sort of take a look at all of the people who worked on this report for an entire year in this plan. So we were really intentional, I think, as a group from the start that we wanted this work to be community collaborative, right? In partnership with the Department of Human Services to create the plan. So we wanted folks from across the sector. We wanted folks that understood parent-aware, folks that deeply understood racial equity. And the department really aimed to bring together a racially diverse group as well. So we made the decision collectively from the beginning that we wanted to hire an external facilitator, which, in full disclosure, part of the reason why I'm sharing the report, we funded a facilitator for it. And it was Atande, who probably many of you know from her work in this coalition when she was working with Laura. Atande and her partner, Haley Tompkins, helped sort of guide us through this process. So the facilitators were super intentional about how we worked together along the way. Sometimes we were all in the conversation together. Sometimes state staff were asked to kind of step back or come together and talk as their own group to create space for community members to really dive into a component or to think really creatively about how do we do something, to think much more maybe boldly than we have thought before. So it was this stated goal along the way that the plan would come from the community, even though we all sort of agreed that the ultimate accountability of this report lived within the Department of Human Services. We wanted it to feel like a really true collaborative. The work had been underway for a number of years, actually, before this group came together in 2021. It actually started in about 2018. I'm sure there are maybe actually roots deeper than that too, but the group that I described really convened in early 2021. We worked closely together for an entire year, and we just finalized the plan last month. So this is freshly completed and just in the beginning stages thinking about implementation, and we'll kind of talk about that in a minute. So what we started with was the problem, right? Often a nice place to start, but we wanted to start by identifying the problems that we wanted to solve with a parent-aware racial equity plan, right? What are the racial equity issues related to parent-aware? And we landed on 5, but one didn't actually end up in the plan, right? And so these, of course, are not comprehensive of every issue or barrier related to parent-aware and racial equity, but this is where the group decided to start. So we focused on children of color attending parent-aware rated programs are not receiving the same preparation and education that white children attending parent-aware programs receive. Parent-aware structure does not equitably support educators in terms of creating and giving access to resources that will help them meet the parent-aware requirements. The third, there's a disconnect between the parent-aware standards and indicators and the communities that they serve. And fourth, elements of the parent-aware have not been aligned or adjusted to reflect the expansion of the knowledge and competency framework for early childhood educators to include cultural relevance. And then that last problem that I think is just much bigger and broader, right? Bureaucracy means change is slow and is rarely able to be responsive in real time. We didn't build strategies out of that one, but just thought it was an important one to name and have in the plan. So from each of these problems, and I just want to like point out the really smart graphic designer that Laura worked with that color coded everything. So the green problem here, children of color attending parent-aware rated programs don't receive the same preparation. The strategy that aligns to that program, how we're addressing that problem, is also green. And you'll see that throughout the plan, everything is color coded, so it's really easy to follow. So from each of the problems, we spent time identifying strategies to address these problems. And we identified 17 strategies that we thought could address these 4 problems. So, you know, many strategies to address each problem. And because we had really skilled facilitators, we narrowed it down to 4 primary strategies that we built the plan around, right? Really trying to get focused so that we can actually get something done, right? So the first is that DHS Child Care Services Division works with an advisory group to create a policy or standard around discipline and expulsion, right? Sort of the example being parent-aware rated programs should not expel children from their programs. The second strategy that went to resources and support for providers of color, we wanted to address inequities in the distribution and access to resources supporting these educators. So strategy all around sort of understanding what resources should be available and making sure that they are, and then tracking that. The third strategy is utilize and leverage the cultural and ethnic communities leadership council, right? Tapping into what we already have available to support program efforts to make racial equity and parent-aware a priority. So a big component of this is establishing a parent-aware racial equity council. And then that last strategy is embed racial equity in workforce preparation and professional development for parent-aware educators in the field. And for DHS grantees that are implementing parent-aware supports. So from these strategies, then
Allison, I just wanted to make a comment about the creation of the strategies as you get into it. So just to note that part of the process that was used is that the group as a total, we each actually divided into ad hoc work groups under each of those strategies that were just mentioned. And so so we actually spent a concerted effort of time around just one strategy, just so people kind of know it was a real, you know, we really targeted our efforts that way. And so people that were on certain committees, we met during the meeting, but most of us, I want to say, probably also had several meetings outside just with our work group to make sure that we were getting everything in there that was needed to be in there.
Yeah, exactly. Like Diana, I can't remember which one you were in, but I was in group number 2, so the blue group, and we just I think we met at least once or twice in between meetings, tons of individual work time. I mean, we the way that it was facilitated, we just got to go deep instead of think about everything all together.
Yes, yeah, I was in number 1.
So I will not go through each of these goals because I don't have time and I'll lose my voice talking. But you can see them up on the slide and obviously read more into each strategy. But Atande was like, on us about creating SMART goals. Like these needed to be strategic. Like, where's the measurement? We spend a ton of time, and you'll see that in the report of like, how will we know we're successful if we're achieving this goal? Who's responsible for it? What is the timeline? What's actually needed? What resources are needed, both people and financial? And so there's a ton of detail in this report about how to actually achieve these goals, to address these problems that we identified. So we're here, we're at next steps. The plan was completed last month, moving into implementation now, which I will let DHS talk more about, because they reconvened our group and are doing some planning about what does that look like to move forward into implementation. But I just wanted to also say that we spent a lot of time as a group identifying both what we as community members expected DHS would take on and do, things like pull all of the strategies together into a more complete work plan, sync up the timing of our strategies, right? As Diane said, we were working in one strategy. I wasn't necessarily looking to see if the timeline I put into my strategy aligned with Diane's strategy. So syncing that all up, making edits in order to have it all kind of fit together and determine how it's going to move forward, right? Who's managing it? How does it fit within the department and within their team? How will the various components be paid for? All of those kinds of things. And we identified what we thought we should do as community members in partnership with the department. You know, things like agreeing to wanting to continue to convene, right? And use the expertise of community partners as we implement each of the strategies and figure out how we as partners can hold the department accountable to implementation. So yeah, we had expectations of ourselves as a group, in addition to the department. And because we worked with Atani and Haley, they gave us some like super solid, straightforward advice to like, do not get caught up in trying to perfectly align the components of the plan to the point where we get stuck and we don't implement because we haven't quite figured out all of the right pieces and how it kind of fits together. Lean into the expertise in the report. You'll even see a note in the report that none of the strategies were edited by the folks that wrote up the report. Atani and Haley left all of the language exactly as written by community members, sort of with this acknowledgement of often that's what happens is community members will give input into a state report and then it gets really finessed and cleaned up by the government partner, and it maybe doesn't sort of say the exact same thing that community members wanted. They were really intentional about keeping everything as said. And they recommended that we continue to invest in this government community partnership in the next phase of the work and leverage support from external partners. And I think I want to make sure we include this coalition in that. So, you know, as the state is thinking about implementation, think about if there's a role for you to play or if there's an interest in staying connected to the work as it, you know, like right now it's a plan. We need to actually make it actionable. So that is all I'll say. Diane, what did I miss?
I thought you did a great job of covering everything. I just want to highlight something you said about implementation, that I think that is the key right now, is for us to figure out how we do the implementing and making sure that we keep that question alive until we get an answer and it's figured out.
All right, do we turn it to Michelle?
I'll share my screen. There we go. Are you able to see the slides? Okay. All right. So my name is Michelle Lenhart. I work for the Minnesota Department of Human Services, and I'm here to tell you about the Parent-Aware Equity Report. So this report, it's interesting. You might, these reports are going to look and seem kind of similar to you between what the one that Allison was just talking about, which is the Parent-Aware Racial Equity Report, and this report, which is just called the Parent-Aware Equity Report. And what happened is that the Minnesota legislature, they put in place a bill during the special session last summer that required us to do outreach with racially, ethnically, culturally, and geographically diverse childcare providers early educators throughout the state of Minnesota. And that bill requiring us to do that happened like parallel simultaneously to while the Parent-Aware Racial Equity Action Team was meeting and developing the action plan. And so these things were happening parallel to each other. So that's kind of a little bit, for anybody who doesn't know that context, that might just be helpful to understand. So the things that we're required to do is that this report was to identify barriers that prevent early educators, childcare providers from pursuing a parent-aware rating. Then we were to summarize and submit the results of the outreach and the plan to reducing those barriers. And we've done that. The report was due March 1st. And so that report is complete and posted, and you can find it on the DHS website now. There's also a page on the parentaware.org website where there's a link to that, as well as a link to a much longer, more detailed report that was done by the group the organization that helped us do the engagement and outreach. And that group was led by Ann Carroll and Associates. So I'm going to go to the next screen. So now I'm going to start telling you a little bit about what was in the report, some of the content and the details. So the barriers that were identified, and this is very high level. I'm not, kind of like Allison, I'm not going to dig deep into the details because there's lots of details that you could read in either the reports or any of the reports I just mentioned. But the barriers fell into these categories: process consistency, information and perceptions, geographic and technology access, experience and literacy, cultural proficiency and relationships and trust. So that's cultural proficiency and relationships like between childcare coaches and the providers they're serving. There's also issues related to language access and jargon, and understanding of terms, just, you know, definitions of things, like those kind, like words that were used. So some of the recommendations were, for example, make forms and materials more plain language and easier to read and use. So then we needed to provide a plan. So based on all of this really rich, really deep, interesting feedback that we received through the outreach process, we were required to, you know, create a plan that identified the barriers and the strategies that we would use to address the issues. So one of the things in the plan, and you will see some alignment here between the information that you just heard about in the Parent-Aware Racial Equity Action Plan and this plan, because like I said, they were happening parallel. And honestly, the Minnesota legislature required us to do this by March 1st, which was really not enough time to do kind of really deep, authentic engagement that was necessary for this type of topic. So we did our best because we had to do it. I mean, you would not believe how quickly we moved to make this happen, not to mention the state government contracting takes time. And so making this happen in this type of time frame was really difficult, but it was accomplished. But we were able to and did leverage a lot of the information and feedback that we had because of the fact that this racial equity action planning and teamwork was happening. And these things kind of came together, and it was really nice because so the racial equity action plan is talked about in the equity plan, and information from it was also leveraged to help develop the plan and the strategies. So the first strategy you'll see is very similar to the first strategy that was listed on the racial equity action plan, which is that we needed an advisory structure that's different than we had in the past, and that you know, really does much deeper, more authentic engagement ongoing. That includes additional outreach and engagement with childcare providers and user experience testing of different aspects of Parent-Aware to make sure that we're getting them right and that they're really user-friendly and they aren't presenting barriers. There's then short-term strategies, and those are strategies that are going to be happening, you know, before the Parent-Aware evaluation comes out. And I'll say more about the Parent-Aware evaluation in a minute, but basically the short-term strategies will be happening or being carried out between February 2022 and December 2024. And then there's these longer-term strategies And those will be happening between January 2024 and June 2026. So we've kind of broken up our strategies into these two different groupings or categories. All right, so when will these things be happening? So the advisory committee structure will be up and implemented this spring. So before summer officially launches, being in the summer, we're going to get this advisory group going. And then the short-term strategies. Some of the short-term strategies include updating forms, the parent-aware data system, marketing materials, the timing of and how the cohorting process within parent-aware happens will be, explored, and ideas and differences, changes to that will be examined. Then the grants payment process was another one that was identified and will be examined, and ideas and alternatives will be discussed and carried out. So then efforts to improve access to technology, training, coaching, especially coaching in languages other than English. We're doing more work around that. And increased outreach for higher education scholarships. So these are the grouping of ideas that will be happening and figured out in the short term. So just to so basically the advisory committee will be leveraged to look into these more and help us really come up with concrete ways they could be implemented and then costed out. And the long-term strategies. So these are post-evaluation changes that are needed. So the parent-aware evaluation was also similar to the equity report was required. So in 2021, there was legislation that funded the evaluation and directed us on how to carry out the evaluation. We've now done a process, and we've selected the department has selected Child Trends to be the organization to carry out and conduct the evaluation. The evaluation will be done in December 2024. So improvements to data collection are some of the other strategies, in addition to doing the evaluation itself and getting more feedback that way. Then there'll be data and provider. We want to improve our ability to collect data on provider race and ethnicity and use that better as well, and equity analysis at the department. There's going to be training on cultural proficiency and responsive instruction. That's already happening, will continue to happen. And even, so part of the long-term strategy is how to keep that happening and develop new training as well for the whole early childhood field. Flexible pathways for training and degrees, and exploration of new peer-to-peer supports and strategies. And then there'll be this whole process of updating the parent-aware standards, indicators, forms, data systems to make them more culturally relevant. And so that will be happening. There'll be early work on exploring what those changes could be from 2022 to 2024, as well as vetting that through more and additional public engagement. And then with the November 2024 through June 2025, there'll be decision making and announcement of changes. And we expect that the new standards and indicators would be fully implemented by June 2026. All right, I'm saying questions here, but really I think I'm supposed to turn it over to Cindy, so I'm going to stop sharing.
Great, thank you, Allison and Diane and Michelle. And really just a huge thanks to you, Allison, for the helpful overview of the report and for the funds for this report through the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation. That was really helpful for us to be able to really get to the point where we are right now. So just a huge thanks to you and the foundation. And then really thanks to Atande and Haley too of LaCroix DeLune Consulting for planning and facilitating the work group. I don't think we would have completed this process without their two very talented and unique facilitation skills that they brought into this work group. And then for many of you here who, some of you here who were a part of the process as well. And so This group really did go above and beyond by participating in this work group over so many months. It was pretty intense, and then more than the time frame that they initially had originally committed to. And so just a huge thanks to everybody who participated in the report that Allison had referenced and in the report that Michelle had just talked about too. So with this process, with these two reports, the department has learned so much through these efforts that we will continue to apply to how we do our work. It will transform the work that we do moving forward. So we're really excited about that, although we know that it's going to be a huge lift too, to be able to move the goals forward. The result is a major body of the work that we must continue in close continued collaboration with many community partners. And so that's one of our priorities, is that we need to continue doing this with our partners. And then also our work will begin with developing a plan that really merges the ideas from the Parent-Aware Racial Equity Action Plan with those in the Parent-Aware Equity Report. And so the plan included in the Parent-Aware Equity Report already leverages many recommendations from the Parent-Aware Racial Equity Action Plan. I have to always remember which one is which. It gets confusing sometimes. And so combining these two sets of recommendations together into a cohesive, coordinated plan will provide a framework and blueprint for us moving forward with updates to Parent-Aware in order for us to address the concerns raised by our stakeholders. And so the department will use this combined plan to explore each idea more deeply with assistance from, Michelle had referenced the newly restructured Parent-Aware Advisory Committee. And so we'll work in partnership with them that includes family childcare providers and centers, and as well as families too. So that is our goal. The Parent-Aware Advisory Group will be more implementation focused and also utilize smaller work groups to explore options for policy changes recommended in these reports, and then later issues identified through the Parent-Aware evaluation that will be up and running shortly here. The process will leverage engagement meetings with providers and user experience testing. And then for each recommendation, the advisory committee will help from its small work groups. Will the advisory for each of the recommendations, the advisory committee, with help from its small work groups, will develop alternatives for implementation. Staff will cost out the options, and then the department will assess feasibility and funding needs. And so we do not know the cost of the ideas included in the implementation, included in the recommendations in these reports until they are assessed. We do not know exactly how and if it will be possible to implement every idea. We are committed to exploring them and working towards implementing the recommendations in these reports, again, in close coordination with stakeholders. And then I do just want to lastly call out that the Parent-Aware Racial Equity Report is going to be heard in the House Early Childhood Policy and Finance Committee next week on March 17th. And I think that hearing starts at 8:30. And then your friend and our new Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Bardi Wahi, will be the presenter for the department on the Parent-Aware Equity Report. So with that, I think we are going to open it up for questions now.
I have a question. This is Nancy, and I was on it, so I should know the answer to this question, but I just want to kind of ask and kind of emphasize the importance of not asking more and more of providers without giving them the tools that they need. Like I think about expulsion and how we, I hope we don't say you can't expel children without giving providers the tools to help keep children in the environment that they're already in. Because I just think it's, it's easy for us on the outside to say, well, I think providers should do this, this, and this. But I think before we do that, we need to stop and think about what do they need in order to do that.
Go
I have a
ahead, Dee.
question.
Yep.
Oh.
Go ahead.
So my question actually is to probably to Michelle, because it's about the report that's to the legislature. So you mentioned that there's going to be a evaluation done and that it's being done by Child Trends. Do you know, will that evaluation include some kind of child level outcome?
Yes. Sorry, that's the short answer. But the answer is yes. Yes, there'll be child assessment and child outcomes data. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to answer Laura's question too. You asked if the racial equity action plan will also be heard in the House committee next week. We were asked to present on the equity report, but like Cindy said, Barty will be the presenter and Barty will be referencing the racial equity report during her presentation and talking about how we used information from that report to inform this report.
Great, thank you. I know Chair Pinto was, we pushed back on him requiring the racial equity report because this process was underway already. So I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware it was done, and we can work with them if that's helpful. But if you're going to include it, that would be great. I just think it's important for them to be able to see the results. So
yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, maybe we should give them a link during the session. So
right.
Put it on the slide. Okay, good thinking. Thank you.
Oh, and I'll just add too that we were really we're trying to stay really connected with what was happening. So like in strategy 2, right, where the problem is inequitable access to resources for providers, like knowing that like we were in that strategy, we were already deep in it and had sort of this plan around outreach and engagement with providers to identify things. And then the legislature put this requirement on the department. So we like changed up our strategy to say, okay, well, we know that we're going to have some information to start with from this report. So let's take that and let's work through implementation as we gear up for the next round, where we want to do outreach and engagement in a much more sort of robust and intentional way. Because ideally we'll have more time. So like the equity report is in the parent-aware racial equity report under strategy 2. So they can like draw that connection there because it just happened while we were making the plan.
Good point. Yep, thanks.
Would you like me to lead the Q&A, or do you want to, as the DHS team, lead that? Either one is fine. I just see that Dr. Wilcoxon has her hand up. So why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Thanks everyone for this very impressive, but extremely painful and worrisome report. It's not like we didn't know this, but we in Minnesota are often going back to study things to death. And the results and the recommendations that you're presenting are not going to touch the lives of the children, professionals, and environments that are currently undergoing this unjust, unfair, and really cruel state. You know me because I've been at DHS, and I spent 15 years trying to push this very stubborn issue. And unfortunately, the needle has moved quite slowly. Infants and toddlers can't wait. We have a budget surplus. So if DHS can't move fast enough, I think external forces need to make them move. And I hope you professionals who hold your positions at DHS don't feel offended by it. we are all part of a big system, so we're just pawns in this big game. But this is about children's lives. We're talking about babies and babies of color who are often excluded from our babies. So this is a very difficult moment for me. Congratulations for forging ahead, but for heaven's sakes, let's do something.
Yes.
You're here.
I have a question, and then I can turn it over to somebody else. Along that lines, I know, Cindy, you mentioned that the recommendations need to be costed out, and that right now the recommendation to utilize a new advisory structure and committee to keep this work going in partnership with community members will happen. Do you anticipate where the department can lean into these other recommendations that doesn't require legislative approval action? That where do you have leverage based on some of these original problem statements and SMART goals that have been identified?
Yeah, I can start, and then Michelle, if you want to chime in too, or any of the other staff members that are here. We are looking at that right now, Laura, exactly that. And there are I think with the recommendations, I think the good news is, and Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong here, that a lot of the recommendations we may not need legislation. And so I think that's favorable for us. It's more of, because there's so much recommendations in both reports, it's identifying what's the low-hanging fruit where we can move on it sooner than later. And so I think part of the work group conversations and the advisory council conversations, and then the continued conversations with many of the members who want to continue the conversations, I think we need to identify, because not everything can be a priority. Like that's just not feasible at all. And so we have to look at now that we have a long list of issues, what should be the priorities. And so I think we really want to be able to look at that and understand that and really make the decisions together with that too. And then, right, we hadn't mentioned about the cost. There are certain pieces that may not require cost. It just really requires time. But there are components that does require cost. And so we're in the process of trying to understand which one it falls under which bucket.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering if others have questions.
I have a question. And I'm new to this meeting. My name is Ann Lewis. I'm a Montessori educator. I have been a co-administrator and educator at a school in Minneapolis, a Montessori school, and we had issues with the Develop program when we were trying to get parent-aware rated, because many of our staff have master's degrees and have further training in Montessori, but we were never getting credit for our Montessori training through Develop that would count for parent aware. So even though we had a diverse staff, even though we had highly trained staff, it was taking a very long time for us to get parent aware rated. So we eventually just became accredited, and which will make it easier for us to get parent aware rated. But I was just surprised how, while I think that part of the issue with training for staff, different programs, different staff, is that it's not really relevant. The Develop program seems to be created by people who aren't in touch with what the needs of urban children might be. That's just my thought, and I'm not sure where other people are on that.
I just wanted, should I share, Cindy? I just
Sure.
wanted to respond that there was a policy change recently that that accommodates training better than it did in the past for Montessori training. And one of our staff was who's listening here was able to send me an IM saying they receive full credit now. So maybe that addresses your.
Great, thank you. Do you, is there somebody who can put something in the chat to help direct people to that change, or any information they can follow up on after the meeting is fine too, so we can get that out to anyone who attended. Joe, you are up next, and then Jane, you can follow Joe, and then just unmute yourself after the questions. And thank you, Jennifer, for taking care of that.
Yeah, thank you so much to the presenters. This is really helpful information. As Dr. Wilcoxon said, I don't think any of us are surprised, and actually it's hard to hear again, but I'm encouraged by the energy around doing something and the very clear recommendations and the alignment of the state and providers and others of us in the space around this work. I am curious about the data behind it, and it's not my only concern, but I did just want to ask while we're talking about it, what would be the best source of data to look at the disparities, both on the provider side and on the child and family side? I know there are a few different sources. I know data is a challenge. It was called out in the report, but as we're thinking about where we need to focus our efforts around racial disparities, and then hopefully as we move toward this longer term evaluation and progress that we see improvement, that would be the goal. What would be the best place to be looking for some of that?
Great question, Joe. I would say that the data that you're probably asking about will be collected through the parent-aware evaluation. So to get at what will be collected, the best source right now, I mean, we could, basically everything that's in the contract is consistent with exactly what it says in the statute. So the statute lays out all the different things, data that needs to be collected. I mean, one thing you could ask for sooner is like, could there be little mini reports, or could there be data from the evaluation shared along the way if what you're looking for is data? So those might be things you would ask directly to the department if that's what you're looking for. But that's how the data collection will be happening. That helps.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Joe. Jane, why don't you go next?
So I have two questions, and one of them is just what is, to me, there's a relationship with the Department of Ed here, because they have programs they supervise with through Parent Aware too. Isn't that true? That's really a question, is sort of where they fit in this. And then the second aspect is one that is sort of the leg of the stool that has to do with workforce, and that the quality rating improvement system is not a QRS, it's a QRIS. And if, again, we come back to this issue of compensation, and in the last 2 weeks, and I've been kind of scrambling on my phone to find it, but I attended a webinar that Representative Liz Bolden was at, and Lori Davis was on this same. And it had to do with the failure of market rate reimbursement. And that if you are in a poor neighborhood, you are forever in being partially reimbursed at a lower expense because of the way that the system is set up. And there is movement nationally around the whole idea of fully funding the cost of care. This is not news to a lot of people on this call, likely, but I want to just say that what you guys have done is really important. And our colleague on Elders, Sandy Heidemann, has said what you learned from providers is spot on. But I just want to sort of reinforce what Antonia said, is this urgency. And I look at 2026 and I'm like, great, but honeys,
we got a generation coming up in 0 to 3. I mean, literally another generation every 3 years. So if we can please keep an eye on the workforce and the reimbursement at the same time and work collaboratively. That's really my plea. And so anyway, I'll stop.
Hi, Jane. Good to see you. Thank you so much for your comments. And I'd like to just give a couple response to that. As far as collaborating with MDE, most definitely. They are our partners. We have regular meetings, parent-aware meetings with them on a monthly basis. They will really be a part of the parent-aware evaluation process too. So we are very close partners in that. As far as the cost of care, I just wanted to note a couple of things around that issue. We are executing a contract right now with an entity to help put together a cost of care evaluation and research for us. And so that is going to be in the hopper. And then I believe there's also right now in this current session, I can't remember who the bill author is, but I believe there's a bill that is trying to, instead of CCAP reimbursement rate, how it's structured right now, the intent of the bill is to reimburse per cost of care model. And so there is a bill that's active right now in this session.
Great, thank you. We have time for one last question. If anyone would like to have that last question before we move. Oh, great. Marisol, why don't you take the last question?
Morning, everyone. It's not a question, but it's a comment. Again, thank you for the
Marisol, I cannot hear you. I don't know if other people can. Okay. Do you want to try again? We still cannot hear you. So I will give you the opportunity to maybe type it in the chat. My wise friend, we cannot hear you. Okay. Why don't we circle back to her question or comment if she's able to log back on with another device. I see she has completely dropped off. We might have lost her completely. So. Okay, I think then what I would like to do just briefly is to say, to ask the department staff as we move away from this discussion, we know that this is really a critical and important work. How can we support you in raising up the awareness about these reports and the urgency behind these reports? I know that you have the hearing next week, so we can definitely submit letters of support for the committee to really push for action, try to put some legislative language that would require some type of action related to these reports. But what other ways can we be supportive to you?
Yeah, I think, my first immediate thought is continue to stay engaged. It's going to be a huge lift. And, we really appreciate everyone's engagement in helping us think through what's the best approach, what should we be prioritizing, helping to push for funding if needed. And so I think staying engaged is probably the our top need right now. And then, right, getting the word out about the reports too. Especially the legislative report that Michelle had referenced. It shouldn't be the end all be all because it was done in such a short amount of time and we did the best that we could, but we can do better with more time too. So those are my immediate thoughts to your question there, Laura.
I would add one more idea for you guys is to encourage childcare providers or families to participate in this advisory group. because that's really how the work is going to get done now. Like we've got all the good ideas, we've got a good timeline, we've got everything moving forward. But if we don't find people to participate in this advisory group, we're not going to be able to take this to the next level. And I'm sure we will find some, but we will work hard. I see Jennifer smiling because it will be Jennifer. And Ann McCauley. Didn't I see Ann McCauley on here earlier? Ann, yes, and your team is also going to be working hard to help us get this advisory committee moving. But we're going to need good people and good thinkers to help us figure out exactly how to do these things. So thanks for that.
Do you all have anything like written down or anything that we could share with providers that kind of talks about what is this advisory committee? What's the expectation? What's the compensation?
Yeah, like I said,
group.
it's launching later this spring, and we haven't developed those materials yet. But yes, when we do, we should just forward that. When we have that information, we'll forward it to this group. You guys can help us. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like you will be compensating them for their time. And I assume the meetings will be not during childcare hours, or is that
right?
Yeah.
Good points. Yep. And we're exploring how to provide some kind of stipends or make it more feasible for people to participate. Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
And Laura, can I ask a quick question? Does anybody on the call know what bill number Cindy was talking about?
Nancy, I can try to help.
Is it Representative Bolden's bill, Michelle? I was trying to find it on the tracker.
I'm not sure.
Nancy, I can tap into CCAP folks and put in the chat.
Oh, super. Thank you. Because, maybe we could, some of us could write letters of support for it. So it'd be helpful to know. Thank you.